The moment my sister Sarah's perfectly manicured fingernails waved that document in the probate court, I knew everything I'd worked for over the past 3 months was worth it. The smug smile on her face was about to vanish, and for once, Grandma Rose's favorite lesson would prove true: the truth always leaves traces. Dear, you just have to know where to look. I'm Emma Chen, 32, a forensic document examiner with the State Crime Lab. It's not the career path my family expected when I declared my major in chemistry, but Grandma Rose had been the only one who truly understood. Sometimes, she'd told me over one of our weekly tea sessions, the most important stories are written in invisible ink. If only she could see how right she'd been. The probate judge, Honor Eleanor Martinez, looked between Sarah and me with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many families tear themselves apart over inheritance disputes. But this wasn't just about money, this was about justice, about protecting Grandma Rose's real legacy. Ms. Chen, Judge Martinez addressed my sister, you've presented what you claim is your grandmother's final will, dated January 15, 2025, 3 weeks before her passing. This document leaves the entirety of Rose Chen's estate, valued at approximately $4.2 million, to you alone. Is that correct? Sarah stood straighter, her designer suit catching the fluorescent courtroom lighting. Yes, Your Honor. Grandma wanted to ensure her estate was managed properly. She knew I had the business acumen to handle it. I tried not to snort. Sarah's business acumen mainly involved running through 3 trust funds and 2 failed startup ventures, but I kept my face neutral, remembering Detective Rivera's advice: let them dig their own holes. The judge turned to me, and Ms. Emma Chen, you're contesting this will's authenticity? Yes, Your Honor. I opened my briefcase, maintaining eye contact with Sarah as I did so. I have evidence that this document is a forgery, created after Grandma's death. Sarah's lawyer, James Morrison, jumped to his feet. Objection. Your Honor, these are baseless accusations from a jealous sister who happens to be a certified forensic document examiner. I interrupted calmly, with the State Crime Lab. The judge's interest visibly piqued. Proceed, Ms. Chen. I pulled out my black light and the documentation I'd spent weeks preparing. Your Honor, I'd like to demonstrate something about the paper this will is printed on. Sarah's confident posture flickered for just a moment. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but I'd grown up watching her tell lies at the dinner table. I knew all her tells. This will was allegedly signed in January 2025. However, the paper it's printed on contains security features that weren't introduced until March 2025. I switched on the black light, and the telltale fluorescent watermarks appeared. These specific markers were developed by Sterling Paper Company for their legal document series. They only began production 2 months ago. The forensic expert I'd consulted, Dr. Marcus Wong, stepped forward from his seat in the gallery. His smile was growing wider by the second. Sarah's face had turned an interesting shade of gray. But I wasn't done. The past 3 months had taught me more about paper manufacture, printing technologies, and document authentication than my entire career. Because this wasn't just about exposing a forgery, it was about understanding why my sister would betray our grandmother's trust so completely. The story really began 6 months ago, when Grandma Rose first showed signs of declining health. She'd always been the family patriarch, the steady hand guiding 3 generations of Chens through life's complexities. Her antique shop, Rose's Treasures, was more than a business. It was a community landmark where stories were traded as often as merchandise. Sarah and I had grown up among those treasures, learning their histories and secrets. But while I inherited Grandma's passion for uncovering the truth behind each artifact, Sarah saw only dollar signs. She'd spent years trying to convince Grandma to sell the shop's prime downtown location to developers. Your grandmother's original will, dated November 2024, is already in evidence, I continued, pulling out another document. It leaves the estate divided equally between Sarah and me, with specific provisions for maintaining Rose's Treasures as a community space. Judge Martinez examined both documents. And you can prove this earlier will is authentic? Yes, Your Honor. I gestured to Dr. Wong. The paper, ink, and signature have all been verified. Additionally, we have video evidence of Grandma Rose signing this document. Sarah's lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear, but she brushed him off. My sister had always been too confident for her own good. What video? She demanded. I nodded to the court clerk, who wheeled in a display screen. Grandma Rose insisted on recording the will signing. She said it was insurance against future misunderstandings. The video showed Grandma in her favorite armchair at the shop, surrounded by her beloved antiques. Her hands were steady as she signed the document, her voice clear as she explained her wishes. Sarah had been there that day, you could see her in the background, phone in hand, barely paying attention. That will was superseded, Sarah argued, but her voice had lost its edge. Grandma changed her mind. Did she? I pulled out my final piece of evidence, because according to her medical records, by January 15th, the date on your version of the will, Grandma Rose was in the hospital with pneumonia. She wasn't signing any documents. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Morrison, your response to this evidence? Sarah's lawyer tugged at his collar. Your Honor, we request a brief recess to what? Judge Martinez interrupted. To explain how your client forged a document using paper that didn't exist when her grandmother was alive? To justify backdating a will while Mrs. Chen was hospitalized? The courtroom had fallen silent. Even the usual shuffle of papers and whispered conversations had ceased. Everyone was watching Sarah, waiting for her explanation. But I knew there wouldn't be a satisfactory one. The truth had started emerging weeks ago, when I began investigating the irregular changes in the shop's accounts. Small withdrawals at first, then larger ones. Security footage showed Sarah visiting the shop after hours, accessing Grandma's office. What she hadn't known was that I'd installed new cameras after the first suspicious withdrawal. Grandma Rose hadn't just taught me about antiques, she'd taught me about protecting what matters. The footage showed Sarah methodically searching through files, photographing documents, practicing Grandma's signature. She'd always been meticulous in her schemes, but this time her attention to detail would be her undoing. Your Honor, Dr. Wong stepped forward. I've analyzed both documents extensively. The forged will show signs of digital manipulation. The signature was likely created using a high-resolution scan of Mrs. Chen's authentic signature, modified slightly to avoid exact duplication. Sarah's face had moved from gray to white. Her lawyer was now openly packing his briefcase. But there was more to the story, much more. The investigation had uncovered a web of financial pressures and desperate decisions that helped explain, if not excuse, Sarah's actions. As the judge called for a brief recess, I couldn't help but remember Grandma Rose's words from years ago. Family secrets are like antiques, dear. The real value isn't in what you see on the surface, it's in the story underneath. During the recess, I found myself standing in the courthouse hallway, staring at the framed photographs of previous judges. My reflection in the glass showed someone who looked more tired than triumphant. Detective Rivera appeared at my side, coffee in hand. You didn't mention the offshore accounts, he said quietly. Not yet. I accepted the coffee, grateful for its warmth. There's more to this than just the will. The investigation into Sarah's forgery had led us down a rabbit hole of financial transactions that painted a disturbing picture. My sister hadn't just been after Grandma's estate, she was desperate to cover up years of increasingly risky financial decisions that had left her millions in debt to some very dangerous people. When court resumed, Judge Martinez's expression had hardened. Before we continue, I should inform all parties that the court has received additional evidence from the district attorney's office regarding related financial matters. Ms. Sarah Chen, do you wish to revise your testimony? Sarah's new lawyer, Morrison, had excused himself during the recess, straightened her jacket. Your Honor, my client would like to. I'll speak for myself, Sarah interrupted, standing. The tremor in her hands betrayed her composed facade. I need to explain something about Grandma Rose. I leaned forward, surprised by the unfamiliar note in my sister's voice. Was it remorse? 3 years ago, Sarah continued, I made some investments that didn't pan out. I borrowed money from people I shouldn't have trusted. They threatened to hurt my family if I didn't pay them back. I thought I could fix everything if I just had access to enough capital. Judge Martinez's expression remained stern. So you decided to forge your grandmother's will? No, I mean, yes, but... Sarah's carefully maintained composure cracked. Grandma found out about my debts last year. She offered to help, but not the way I needed. She wanted me to go to the police, to face consequences. She didn't understand these weren't ordinary creditors. The truth hit me like a physical blow. The break-in at the shop last October, that wasn't random, was it? Sarah wouldn't meet my eyes. They were sending a message. I needed to pay them back quickly, or next time they wouldn't just break windows. Dr. Wong cleared his throat. Your Honor, if I may? The document analysis revealed multiple drafts of the forged will on Ms. Sarah Chen's laptop. The earliest versions date back to September 2024. Before the break-in, I realized, you were planning this even while Grandma was trying to help you. Mrs. Rose Chen's original will included provisions for a trust fund, Sarah's lawyer interjected, specifically designed to help her granddaughter resolve these debts legally. I pulled out my tablet, opening files I'd hoped not to need. That trust fund wouldn't have helped much, would it, Sarah? Not with what you really owe. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, we've uncovered evidence of systematic fraud extending far beyond this inheritance issue. The court clerk distributed copies of my findings, bank statements, transfer records, shell company registrations. Sarah had been running a complex investment scheme, using her connections in the antique world to authenticate forgeries while selling the originals on the black market. Grandma discovered what you were really doing with her authentication papers, didn't she? I asked softly. That's why she installed new security cameras in the shop, not because of the break-in, but because she knew you were using her reputation to validate fake antiques. Sarah's face crumpled. She was going to report me, her own granddaughter, after everything I'd done to build our family's wealth. You mean destroy it? I corrected. Those investments you mentioned? You were gambling with more than money. You were gambling with Grandma's legacy, her lifetime of building trust in the community. Judge Martinez raised her hand, silencing us both. I've seen enough. This court finds clear evidence of will forgery, fraud, and potential criminal conspiracy. Ms. Sarah Chen, you are remanded into custody pending criminal charges. All assets related to Rose's treasures and the Chen estate are to be frozen until a full audit can be completed. As the bailiff approached Sarah, she turned to me with desperate eyes. Emma, please, you don't understand what they'll do to me in prison. Actually, Detective Rivera stepped forward. We do understand. The DA's office is prepared to offer protective custody in exchange for cooperation in identifying your partners in the authentication scheme. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and procedures. Sarah was led away, her designer suit replaced with an orange jumpsuit, but amid the chaos, a court clerk handed me an envelope I hadn't seen before. It was logged with your grandmother's personal effects, she explained, specifically to be delivered after any will dispute was resolved. Inside was a letter in Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting, dated just days before her hospitalization. My dearest Emma. If you're reading this, then you've already discovered what Sarah has done. I knew she would try something after I confronted her about the forgeries. My only regret is not seeing you prove it, though I'm sure you did so brilliantly. The shop's real treasures were never the antiques themselves, but the stories they carried and the truths they revealed. You understood that from the beginning. Sarah saw only objects to be priced and sold. But you saw the history, the connections, the human heart in every piece. I've left instructions with my lawyer about converting the shop into a nonprofit foundation. The Chin Family Heritage Center will continue my work of preserving stories and teaching young people about the value of truth, in objects and in life. You'll find everything you need in the safe behind the Ming vase. The combination is your birthday, naturally. Remember what I always told you about traces? The truth leaves them everywhere, not just on paper or in ink, but in the choices we make and the lives we touch. You've always been good at finding those traces, my brilliant girl. Now use that gift to help others find their own truths. All my love. Grandma Rose. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated Rose's Treasures, now the Chin Family Heritage Center. The antique shop's main floor had been transformed into a community space where local historians gave lectures, students learned about authentication techniques, and yes, people still bought and sold treasures with stories worth preserving. Sarah had accepted the DA's deal, providing evidence that helped shut down 3 major forgery rings. She would serve 5 years, with mandatory counseling and financial oversight after release. More importantly, she had finally started therapy to address the underlying issues that had driven her desperate schemes. The Heritage Center's first major exhibition featured items from Grandma Rose's personal collection, each with its own story of discovery and verification. The centerpiece was a display about document examination and forgery detection, using Sarah's fake will as a teaching tool, with court permission, of course. Dr. Wang had joined our board of directors, helping establish a scholarship program for students interested in forensic science. Detective Rivera regularly brought his rookie officers through for seminars on investigating fraud and financial crimes. But my favorite addition was the Children's Corner, where kids learned about authentication through hands-on activities, watching them shine black lights on various papers and inks, their faces lighting up with discovery. I often heard echoes of Grandma Rose's voice. The truth always leaves traces, dear. You just have to know where to look. The shop's bell chimed. We'd kept it during renovations, and a familiar figure entered. Sarah, on her first supervised leave from prison, looked smaller in her plain clothes, but somehow more real than she had in her power suits. The place looks different, she said quietly. But the important things are the same. I gestured to the antique chairs where we'd spent countless childhood hours listening to Grandma's stories. Want some tea? As we sat together, surrounded by objects that held generations of truths, I remembered another of Grandma Rose's favorite sayings: every fake reveals something real, our desires, our fears, our desperate need to be something we're not, but authenticity, dear ones, that reveals who we truly are. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she held her teacup. I found out who I was in the worst possible way. No, I corrected gently, you found out who you were pretending to be. Who you are is still a story waiting to be authenticated. Above us, Grandma Rose's portrait smiled down at her two granddaughters, finally having an honest conversation among the treasures she'd left behind, not just the antiques and artifacts, but the harder, more valuable legacy of truth. The Heritage Center's newest program was set to launch next month, a series of workshops on financial literacy and ethical business practices, inspired by Sarah's story but focused on prevention rather than punishment. She had agreed to record a video message for participants, turning her mistakes into lessons others could learn from. As the afternoon light filtered through the shop's restored stained glass windows, creating patterns on the hardwood floors that had held 3 generations of Chen family stories, I thought about traces of truth, of deception, of love, of redemption. They were all there, if you knew where to look. And in the end, that was Grandma Rose's greatest gift to us both, the understanding that every object, every document, every human heart carries its own authentic story. Sometimes it takes a black light to reveal it, sometimes it takes a courtroom, and sometimes, it takes the courage to finally stop forging the life you think you should have, and start authenticating the one you actually do. The bell chimed again as Sarah's supervisor arrived to take her back, but before she left, she paused by the new sign above the door. The truth leaves traces, she read aloud. Grandma always did know best. I watched her go, then turned back to the day's work of preserving stories, detecting frauds, and helping others find their own paths to authenticity. In my office, the frame containing both wills, the forged and the real, hung as a reminder that the most valuable inheritance Grandma Rose left wasn't her wealth or her shop, but her unwavering belief that truth, like family, was worth fighting for. And in the end, she was right about all of it: the traces, the treasures, and the triumph of authenticity over artifice. Some might call it justice, but I prefer to think of it as Grandma Rose's final lesson, that in a world full of forgeries, the real treasure is having the courage to be genuine, even when, especially when, the truth hurts. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows through the shop's windows, but I wasn't ready to leave just yet. There were still traces to examine, stories to authenticate, and truths to preserve. After all, that's what Grandma Rose would have wanted. And somewhere, I was sure, she was smiling at how her granddaughters had finally learned to tell the difference between what's fake and what's genuinely precious.